On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for their actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, the community, and the agency I serve.
Welcome to Monday Morning Roll Call. I am your host and founder, Wayne Mulder, and this is episode number 18. I want to thank you for continuing to listen to us, and I want to thank you for your continued support. This episode marks something kind of exciting for us, and this one there's actually going to be video. These Monday morning roll calls, unfortunately, it's nothing more exciting than just looking at me talk for 10 to 15 minutes. However, I do encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, and this is going to be the beginning of allowing us to go further into this whole road of using video and also some visual storytelling and things that we're going to do down the road. So definitely check us out on YouTube, and if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel On the Blue Line, I suggest that you go over there immediately following this episode and check it out, and you can certainly follow the links in our show notes. So this week, I want to do something a little bit different, and I want to go over a question that came in from our closed Facebook group. Now, our closed Facebook group, it's On the Blue Line Guild, and I highly recommend, if you haven't checked it out, that you get over there and take a look at it. There's some really good stuff on there, and it's where we kind of continue the conversation. So if you're not a member of the guild, please, immediately following this, click on the links and go over there to our closed Facebook group. But there's a couple questions that are real short and simple that I'm going to go over this week, and a couple that are a little bit more in-depth that I'm actually going to spend an entire roll call going over. The first one, do you have any On the Blue Line merchandise available yet? Well, the good news is we have it coming. So as you can see behind me here, we have the logos, and everything is getting printed. So here within the next couple weeks, decals will be available. In fact, we've started giving a few decals out as awards for different things, trying to build some of our support in our Facebook and Twitter and other social media accounts. So certainly make sure you're following us, and there'll be more information on where that stuff is and how it will be available in the days ahead. The other question that came in is, what is your opinion on the latest in the Starbucks stunt? I think that's worded very well, and that's actually exactly what we're going to go over this week. So this week, I wanted to go over what I'm terming the business of outrage culture. So as some of you are aware, there was a story out of Tempe, Arizona, which Fox News had an article where police officers in Tempe, Arizona say they were asked to leave a Starbucks coffee shop on the 4th of July because a customer complained that they did not feel safe with uniformed cops present. So essentially there's 5, by some accounts 6, law enforcement officers, all in full uniform, all inside a Starbucks. And a customer says, I don't feel safe because I'm seeing these uniformed officers in here. Okay. So the barista had a decision to make, and the decision she made, or he or she made, is they went over and they said, hey, officers, can you either move out of that customer's line of sight, or will you just leave the store altogether? And needless to say, the police union and the agencies in that area were not too impressed with that decision making. And it wasn't the best way to handle this type of situation anyway. You have uniformed officers in a place, they paid for the coffee, and especially in one that is especially in a store that is all about inclusivity and having everybody be a part of it. Here we are taking one group of people and saying you're making another group uncomfortable, so now you need to leave. So clearly this was a PR nightmare for them. That's not primarily what I want to talk about, though that is what started what was to follow. So what happened we have a Twitter account now, and I was never real big into social media, primarily for this very reason. I think a lot of foolishness happens on social media. But when you start an online company and you are doing something like a podcast or any kind of writing, you've got to get it out to people. And where are people? They're on social media. So that's exactly what we've been taking advantage of to try to get out there. Well, on Twitter, somebody had posted that story, and there's no issue with what they posted. They just posted it, and then they linked a lot of companies, and one of the companies they linked was ours On the Blue Line 1, the number 1 on Twitter. So what was to follow was some of the most foolish statements and insane statements that I've ever seen in my life. You had cops being referred to as uniformed thugs, street gangs with political connections, of course, the statement pigs that, of course, you hear from time to time. And I'm going to read you just a few of these Twitter posts that had come out in this thread. So essentially what this individual who started it, all they were saying is, hey, this happened in Tempe, Arizona. They kicked these officers out. This isn't right. I happen to agree. It wasn't a good decision that was made. Well, somehow it dissolves into, quote, when they get rid of the racists and killers in their ranks, then fearing them will be outrageous. Until then, it's common sense, end quote. Then, quote, cops are the bad guys. Sorry, not sorry, end quote. Quote, law enforcement has a history of murdering kids on the street for no reason. There's a good reason not to trust law enforcement. Have you forgotten the video of the cops beating up the black family? End quote. Quote, F you and F the police. End quote. Cops are a nationwide street gang with badges and political connections. End quote. So these are some of the more innocuous ones that came out. These are some of the ones that weren't as big of a deal. And it was just complete craziness that was put out there. And then on the other side of the equation, you had ones like this one. Quote, a great way for a crook to get rid of the police, tell the clerk she is scared. The police are there. Clerk asks police to leave. Police leave and crook robs said Starbucks. Good idea. No. These fast food workers better get their heads out of their hind ends before they get hurt. Before they get hurt, are we threatening them? If they don't change their ways, we're going to do what exactly? See, it was just insane to me. And it was on both sides of the equation. It was this whole outrage, and everybody's just angry and screaming at each other. Did this barista make a really bad decision from a PR standpoint for Starbucks? Yes. Do people make really bad decisions every given day? Yes. And so there was some that were voices of common sense. And here's one, quote, I know there's a lot of tension on both sides of this thread, but we are all human. We all make mistakes. Rather than litigating it on Twitter, I'd rather choose to show everybody that officers are just human and not to be feared. See, that's the thing. It just starts dissolving into this whole anger, outrage that doesn't do anybody or anything any good except for the business itself. So let's consider something else. Now, I do want to point out that Starbucks did end up apologizing about the whole deal. And of course, that went on Twitter, and some people were for it, some weren't. A lot of people were posting all the good Starbucks that have taken care of them, and they go in there and they get their free coffees. And honestly, I've never had a bad experience in a Starbucks. But some have, some haven't. There was an apology put out in which this executive vice president states that the officers should have been welcomed and treated with dignity and the utmost respect by our partners. Instead, they were made to feel unwelcome and disrespected, which is completely unacceptable. And of course, then this individual flew out to Tempe, Arizona and met with the police union and with the officers and tried to handle some of this from a public relations standpoint. Okay, it is what it is. So there is, of course, the issue just shortly before this one, which was the Nike dropping the Betsy Ross shoe flag. And of course, these Betsy Ross flag shoes ended up all over the internet as well. And it states in this New York Times article that Nike planned to celebrate the 4th of July with a new sneaker, a special edition of the Air Max 1 Airstrike, and it was going to have the American flag on there. But specifically the one that's similar to what's on my shirt, which is the 13 stars and is known as the Betsy Ross flag, which usually and should be associated primarily with the Revolutionary War and, of course, the Philadelphia seamstress, Betsy Ross. It doesn't... The article goes on to say how this flag for some has a painful history of oppression and racism. And if you really read through it, they actually are saying that it hasn't been until recently that things that they believe have racist ideologies are being shown with the 13-star flag. And hence, they think that this flag somehow represents that. That's essentially what happened. And when you read on here, it says the abrupt cancellation came after Colin Kaepernick, the former National Football League quarterback and social justice activist, privately criticized the design to Nike, according to one person with knowledge of the interaction. So, needless to say, there was a lot of outcry and people were like, this is ridiculous. And what's interesting is part of the reason why it has become a negative symbol is its association to what they call racist ideologies, which included being alongside a Trump political banner. So obviously, I think that there's maybe a little misunderstanding and naivete even on that, as well as the need for a history lesson. But again, that's not the point of this. What this goes on is Senator Ted Cruz, he comes out and makes a statement. It's a good thing Nike only wants to sell sneakers to people who hate the American flag, end quote. And Herman Cain, the former Republican presidential candidate, tweeted, just so you know how this works now, nothing can happen in America anymore if Colin Kaepernick doesn't like it, which is an interesting point as well, and one that I will never fully understand. But this is what I want you to consider. But analysts said, this is coming from that same New York Times article, but analysts said that Nike has not suffered financially from its association with an athlete who had become a symbol of the so-called resistance movement. Pretty much every metric you can look up at for Nike is positive. Their social media mentions went up, their sales rose again week after week, and they won a bunch of awards for the ad campaign. So there's a quote in here that they are clearly aligned with their core customer base, the millennial and Gen Z consumer. And if they have alienated others, those are not the folks who buy a lot of Nikes. The Blaze, the news organization The Blaze, just came out with this article just a couple days ago and says, as of market close on Friday, Nike shares were up 2% in just 3 days, which added a whopping $3 billion to Nike's market value, which closed at $136.38 billion on Friday. So here's the point of all this. There is a clear business to this quote-unquote outrage culture, to this whole idea that we're going to get angry and we're going to boycott and we're not going to do anything with this company anymore. Here's the thing. I am not the target customer of a lot of these companies. I am not Nike's target customer. I'm not now. I'm probably will never be. Starbucks? Not really. I disagree with Starbucks on all sorts of their ideologies. Not just this one incident. It's just Starbucks makes a good cup of coffee. And every once in a while, I buy a Starbucks cup of coffee because I like a venti dark roast pour over coffee. And it's good, in my opinion. But it's not the only coffee I buy. And I would never consider my values and thoughts and where I stand on issues and social issues in line with Starbucks or with Target Corporation or with Apple or with Dick's Sporting Goods, with any of these companies. And we're seeing more and more of this outrage coming out where people are all upset and they're all angry. And as you can see in some of these Twitter feeds, they're even sitting here and threatening each other over a company that most people are going to line kind of on one side or the other anyway. The thing with these companies is they know their target customer. Me, when it comes to a coffee company, I'm a much bigger fan of companies like Black Rifle Coffee Company or Blue Line Roasters or Three Rivers Coffee Company. In fact, I'm a member of one of those coffee clubs and I get it on a regular basis and I enjoy their coffee. But that doesn't mean when I'm out on a trip, I don't stop in and have a Starbucks cup of coffee. And that's really the point here. You know, you don't have to go to whatever company it is. You don't have to fall into purchasing solely from them. It doesn't mean that you can't buy their product, but it also doesn't mean that you have to buy their product. And that's kind of where this really weird scenario comes in today's social media world. It's an all or nothing scenario. Well, we're going to boycott them. We're never going to go there. Well, nobody cares that I don't buy a pair of Nike shoes because I'm not the person that buys the majority of Nike shoes. The people that listen to what Colin Kaepernick says are probably more likely to be the ones that are going to buy a pair of Nike shoes. So it makes sense for them to put their rhetoric and put their money into something that's going to build their brand and build it among the consumers that are interested in their product. So listen, there's nothing wrong with boycotting these companies. If you're not their target customer, then why get so upset about it? We got to understand that often what drives this is money, and it panders to this echo chamber that drives their bottom line. these people that are making these absolutely absurd statements on Twitter are going to be the ones that are going to buy that product. And while they're bouncing around and having these conversations, when it comes time to, hey, I really need a new pair of Air Jordans or whatever it is, they're going to be the ones that are going to go out and buy it. So my real point is, we don't want to exchange human decency and common sense to make a point. There's absolute foolishness, this rhetoric, this naivete on social media is both concerning and appalling. And we have to be willing to say, enough is enough. So the final thought on all this is, if you want a cup of coffee, go buy a cup of coffee. If you want to put your money into good organizations that agree with you on your values, then do that. Seek those companies out. But don't descend into this angry, screaming, demeaning statements that are made all over social media that is nothing more than just pure rhetoric and helps to drive the sales of these companies that you're actually saying you hate. So my suggestion is, if you want a cup of Starbucks coffee, go get a cup of Starbucks coffee. And if you don't and you want to boycott them, by all means boycott them. But let's keep it civil. That's all I have for you this week. So that does it for this week. We will see you next week at Roll Call. And in the meantime, I will see you out there on the Blue Line.